Gavel in the work session of the Anchorage Assembly regarding AO number 2019-15, ordinance to protect the health of children and firefighters by amending the Anchorage Municipal Code to add a chapter on consumer products, a new section prohibiting certain flame retardant chemicals harmful to health and development. Appreciate members of being here. One of the primary purposes is to hear from some of the opponents, or at least people who would propose amendments. I think a little of both. As a preliminary matter, some of the testifiers today are lobbyists for their trade group or corporation. Some are executives in that who sometimes appear and testify. It led to a whole discussion coming into this of what the definition of a lobbyist is under our code, whether they had to register. Some have, some haven't. Our code says in section 2535030 A4, a person who appears before an elected or appointed body in response to an invitation, not including a notice of public hearing, so the notice of public hearing is not enough, by the body is not considered a lobbyist. And so my intent was to hear from the opponents, not to trap anyone into having to register under Anchorage law or getting fined for not registering. So the people who are here, coordinated by Mr. Bickford, who is a registered lobbyist, the people who want to testify on this matter, I'm going to say are in response to an invitation. And so I think maybe one has registered, most haven't, but anyway, it should mean that you do not have to and don't get in any trouble under Anchorage law. Because my intent was to hear from the opponents and not to trap them. And I had asked Mr. Bickford to try and hit the mark of about 15 minutes of testimony in opposition and about 15 more for questions regarding that. So if we could try and get to as close to having 30 minutes on that, I'd appreciate it. We have a number of, we have 4 people on the line, and then Mr. Moyer here in person. Mr. Bickford, did you want them to speak, or did you want to speak on this issue? Them to speak, and we'll go just for convenience to the phone lines first. I have Jennifer Gibbons, Jay West, Andrew Hackman, and Jeffrey Temple. I just have them in that order from the clerk. So if you don't mind, we'll just start in that order. And if you would be clear about who you represent, that'd be appropriate. If you could stick to hit that time to 3 or 4 minutes of testimony, we'd appreciate it. And we'll start with Ms. Gibbons.
You said, I believe you're starting with me. This is Jennifer Gibbons, and I'm with the Toy Association. The Toy Association represents over 950 businesses, and that's toy manufacturers, importers, and retailers of children's products in North America. While we do share the Assembly's desire to ensure the safety of children, we've got several concerns as the proposal is drafted. First off, the proposed ordinance would apply to any component of a product, even if it's in inaccessible parts. Toy manufacturers are not typically adding any flame retardants to toys. However, some of these substances may be present in certain components of toys, such as electronic circuit boards and assemblies. And while these are inaccessible to children, it is crucial to the electrical safety of the products in which these parts are used. Prohibiting flame retardants in electronic components and assemblies may result in thermal and electrical risk that does not exist today because of the use of such substances. Without a viable alternative, these products could present an increased flammability risk in the event of a certain electrical fault. As you may know, the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission is currently evaluating potential restrictions to flame retardant chemicals under the Federal Hazardous Substances Act, and they're specifically looking at it for children. They do not need any additional authority in order to regulate those substances where warranted. Another major concern we have in the proposed ordinance is the required labeling. The ordinance would require labeling of products to state if the product does or does not contain a flame retardant chemical. So even if your product has never had or never will have a flame retardant present, it would still be subject to this labeling provision. Having these labeling requirements for local or state jurisdictions is a massive undertaking for companies, and we're already mandated to provide certain safety information on product labels. Creating this new labeling for the city of Anchorage may not be possible as the same products are being sold across many different jurisdictions, and the provision could potentially result in products no longer being offered for sale in the city. While there is an effective date of 2020 for the flame retardant ban, there's no specified date for the labeling requirement, which would seem to mean it would be effective immediately upon passage and impacting a product that's currently on store shelves or that's already in the process of production. So we would strongly urge the Assembly to consider removing the labeling requirement. Lastly, the proposed ordinance would require written compliance statements to be made available for inspection upon request. This information would not be immediately available at a local retail store. A time frame would be needed for retailers to be able to reasonably process these requests and obtain the information and provide it. So we would ask that you consider amending the ordinance so that there is a time frame, perhaps 60 days, and also to recognize compliance statements that are used to comply with similar requirements in other states or localities. We appreciate you hearing our comments today and considering these requests, and we hope to work with you to address some of these issues.
Excellent, thank you, and appreciate you hitting all the points but being succinct. Before we go to Mr. West, you're on deck. Mr. West, I want to go through the packet for the members. So you've got a big packet, both of the bill and supporting document. I want to make sure you have it all. So the bill is first in a letter from the American Chemistry Council, Mr. Simon, a letter from Panasonic, David Thompson, and then the Toy Association, a letter I think from you, Ms. Gibbons, on stating those concerns.
That's correct.
Yeah, February 17th letter. A letter from Juvenile Products Manufacturers Association with their concerns. A resolution from the Abbott Loop Community Council in support, a resolution of the Northeast Community Council in support, a resolution of the Airport Heights Community Council in support. Comments from the Health Department, our municipal health department. In my packet, the next thing is their suggested amendments. They have 9 of them. A cost sheet from our health department on expected cost to implement this. A policy recommendation, so 3 documents from the health department. Then there is a proposed amendment that came from one of the industry groups. I thought it came with the Panasonic, but it's also repeated at the end. You were just handed. It says in red, and the one you got handed, it has it actually in red, the amendment proposals. And let me just ask Ms. Gibbons while she's on, well, you're welcome to stay on, of course. The proposed amendment deletes labeling and added, I'm not sure whether it addressed the electronic issue. Oh, electronic components of upholstered furniture, reupholstered furniture, juvenile products, or any associated casing. So the proposed amendment that we had from at least one industry group added to exceptions electronic components. Does that address your concern on the electronic components, Ms. Gibbons?
Yes, I believe that it does. And I believe that that amendment also addresses our issue relating to a time frame for providing proof of compliance. If I'm correct.
Yeah. Okay, below that, below that for the members, it has a 60-day or so under approval plans. Great, I just want to make sure. So just going again through the packet, there's the proposed amendments in red, but it's not in red, it's lying to you, but later on it is in red and you can see it. There's a Turnagain Community Council, they'll get the final, but we were, Ms. Quinn Davidson and I were at the Turnagain Community Council last night and they passed this resolution, a letter of support from Susan Ingalls of the Sustainable Furnishings Council, an individual letter of support from a constituent, suggested amendments from the Alaska Community Action on Toxics, and then again the proposed amendments from industry representatives in red with a rationale for it. So everyone should have those things, Mr. Trainor?
There's a requirement for the SE attached. Statement of economic effects, both government and private. Is that going to be at our Sunday meeting on Tuesday? I don't see it in the packet. I'd like to know.
Yeah, we're going to work on a C. We did know that, but you're right. A C is required.
And I think by this, Section 3 requires immediate passage goes into effect. All right, since you're one of the authors, are you willing to put a year off on it? Because there's a lot of product on the shelf right now. So what are they going to do? Like Joanne Fabrics, they sell flame retardant cloth. Are they going to just have to eat all of that or what?
So that was Mr. Trainor for the record. Be sure, because we've got telephonic, to identify yourself for the record, but that's fine. Yeah, I'm one of multiple sponsors, so we would consider that. We'd consider any amendment you put forward. That's okay?
Thank you, Mr. Croft. I was just going to mention we had identified ourselves for the record.
Yeah. So we should do that, and then you're handed one. I think it's just a cleaned up letter of the Ms. Ingalls' position from the Sustainable Furnishings Council. I wasn't meaning to eat into your time. Appreciate it. We'll go back to testifiers. So I just wanted to make sure everyone had the same set of materials. Mr. West.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize. This is Robert Simon from the American Chemistry Council, and there was some confusion. So I'm testifying instead of Mr. West, and it was my name that was on some of the comments that we provided to the Assembly.
Got it. Okay, you're Mrs. Simon. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks to the Assembly for the opportunity to provide some feedback on the proposed ordinance. My name is Robert Simon, and I'm testifying today on behalf of the American Chemistry Council's North American Flame Retardant Alliance. That alliance is a trade association of the producers of flame retardants. Overall, flame retardants are a critical component to the comprehensive approach to fire safety, and they can provide an important layer of fire protection by both stopping or delaying the onset or spread of fires. And flame retardants play an important role by reducing the rate of heat release and the spread of flames from a fire, particularly those that may emanate from potentially flammable products. The two comments that I think we want to emphasize today are, one, as the Assembly looks at this, it strongly encourages you to consider the overall impact on product safety. As you've already heard from the toy industry, there are a number of components within products that present a unique fire hazard, and removing or requiring the option to use removing the option to use flame retardants will increase the risk of fire. Particularly for some of the products that are listed in this ordinance, you are now removing a protective flame retardant measure from an active ignition source that's within a flammable product, with serious implications for overall product safety. So that was number one. Second, we also have concerns about the extremely broad definition of prohibited flame retardant chemical. This bill essentially bans virtually all flame retardants. So one, just on a science basis, this would group all flame retardants together, which there's a broad range of materials that are covered there, many of which are very different, have different chemical properties and different compositions and uses. And some of that's for the reason that flame retardants aren't interchangeable. So a chemical that may be appropriate for flame retarding one product may not be appropriate for others. And it's just not appropriate to make such broad conclusions or impose a one-size-fits-all regulatory approach on such a broad range of substances. Related to that, and equally important, is this would significantly undermine innovation. The definition would prohibit not only today's flame retardants, but any flame retardant, including safer alternatives that are developed in the future, and would remove those from the market and prevent them from even coming to market. And that's particularly concerning, as you've heard from, and we'll hear from maybe others, as product manufacturers are looking for ways to protect their products, ensuring that they have access to appropriately safe chemicals is critical, and we hate to see restrictions on bringing new, innovative, safe products to market. We want to have both chemical safety and fire safety, and we think we can have both, and would encourage the Assembly to consider the definition of flame retardants as they review this ordinance. So I'll stop there and appreciate again the opportunity to provide these comments.
Thank you, Mr. Simon. And as we said, we have your letter as well, and we'll get to question. You want to do it after all four have spoken or individually? Okay. Question from Mr. Weddleton, Mr. Simon. So go ahead, Mr. Weddleton.
I guess more than one, I guess.
Speak up.
Okay, more than one question, and maybe it's a yes, no, but we've heard that these chemicals are bad for our health. Is that true?
So this is Robert Simon. So as with all things, you need to evaluate these on a substance basis. So this ordinance would ban substances that have been determined to not present a risk by multiple government agencies. So there are clearly products that do not present a risk that would be restricted by this legislation.
Okay, we've also, a lot of this, I understand the electronics features really important, but broadly looking at this, it looks like it's mostly dealing with, upholstered furniture. And, I bought some furniture and I've never heard as a selling point, oh, and it's flame retardant. It's just never even really mentioned. So I just wonder why manufacturers of furniture would spend the money to put this on their furniture when it really doesn't seem to add value. It doesn't increase their sales. Is it required somewhere, or what's going on?
At least for upholstered furniture, I think that's a good question. There's nothing that requires the use of these materials. They have been used for fire safety, and it's probably worth noting, because this is probably maybe the most important point from a fire safety perspective. Upholstered furniture is a significant source of fire hazard. According to the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission, there are on average over 4,700 fires and over 1,000 fire deaths that involve upholstered furniture. So part of the reason for the use of these materials is to ensure product safety. There's lots of different ways to approach fire safety, but again, if you have a safe chemical and that's an option, we think that should be appropriate and considered as part of the ordinance.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we can do questions as we go if they're pressing, or we can do them at the end, but just as the members want. I had next on my list Mr. Hackman.
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the Assembly, my name is Andrew Hackman, and I am testifying on behalf of the Juvenile Product Manufacturers Association. We represent 95% of the juvenile product industry, everything from baby strollers to cribs to bassinets to car seats and those types of products that help bring young infants and children into your home and to help protect them throughout their early life cycle stages. I want to say, and you guys have a copy of my letter, so I don't want to spend too much time in detail, but I want to underscore the fact that safety is our number one priority. I'm a father myself, and we are not actively adding flame retardants unless they're absolutely necessary or more specifically required by certain safety standards. You've heard a lot about inaccessible electronic components. I want to second that motion in the sense that we also have inaccessible electronic components that to meet UL performance standards, there is a necessity to have flame resistance in those materials. And again, those are inaccessible and not intended to come into contact with the child through reasonable and foreseeable use and abuse. So that goes above and beyond in terms of the safety standards that these products have to meet and encase those internal components. Secondarily, I wanted to highlight two product categories that are unique to the juvenile product industry: car seats and child-resistant seats are mandated by federal NHTSA standards that have flame-resistant properties. Specifically, the NHTSA FMVSS 302 flammability standard is required at the federal level and necessitates the use of those flame retardants to meet the technical specifications of that standard. Every other jurisdiction that has examined this issue has exempted car seats from the requirements based upon that standard, and we've worked with those local governments like the city of San Francisco, and states like California, when those issues have presented themselves, and believe that that's a necessary part of the amendment that we, along with others in industry, have offered. And I want to say, we have been working with state governments like the state of California that have juvenile products exempted from mandatory flame retardant standards, and have made significant progress and success, being one of the earliest industries that have to look at moving away from those materials. So it's not something that we're actively adding to our product. With regard to the labeling provision, I also want to underscore the impact it would have on our industry. We did a quick survey of our members over the last week and a half or so, and got some cost estimates to do a labeling provision, anywhere from $50,000 to $500,000, based upon the fact that, as mentioned before by earlier witnesses, you would have to label everything in the product category, regardless of whether or not it does include the flame retardant or it does not. And the cost estimate up to $500,000 for many of our members that eclipses their total sales in the state of Alaska. So it would be a significant burden, and certainly set not only the city but the state in a much different path than the rest of the country, and certainly the rest of the world in terms of this issue. So I certainly appreciate the time this evening or this afternoon, and certainly would welcome any questions that the Assembly has for our sector of the industry.
We do have some questions, Mr. Dunbar and then Mr. Weddleton.
Thank you. First, a comment: we still do need to go around and identify ourselves for the record. I'm really glad we got this testimony. I think we'll get more too. We had a number of work sessions trying to develop this ordinance, and it just seemed impossible to get any feedback. And so I'm glad we got it out on the table, and now we're going through an actual editing process, because suddenly we have lobbyists in DC that notice us. But my other question is, so we have this amendment. We got this giant packet of papers, and we have this amendment proposal in red. Is this one of these lobbyists' proposal, or is it all of them together? So I guess, is it from Mr. Bigford? Does it sort of synthesize the comments of all of these organizations, or just some of these organizations?
So it's a compilation of the comments of these organizations under the Council.
Speak up. You got to be heard.
So it's a compilation of a bunch of different organizations in the American Chemistry Council that are put these together, and I'll get you more specific.
Great. So there's an axiom we use in legislating, which is you don't amend something if you're not going to vote for it after you amend it. So it's my understanding from people on the phone that if we pass these amendments, which you provided to us, you would then support the ordinance. So I guess I'll start with the person who just testified.
Mr. Hackman, and then anyone else on the line.
Yeah, I've obviously not seen the document in front of me, but the amendments that we have worked on with the other coalition members would address our concerns, and we would no longer have objections to the ordinance.
Great. Can I ask one other question, Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
So this is actually for the prior testifier from the chemical industry. The proposal, the document that we received from the JPMA, the person who just testified, states that in September 2017, the Consumer Product Safety Commission voted to grant a petition to prohibit the use of additive organ, halogen, flame retardant in children's products, upholstered residential furniture, mattresses, and external casings of electronic devices. So I'm curious, why would the federal government vote, or this commission at least, vote to ban those products in those cases? If your testimony is that they aren't harmful for folks.
So I think that's for Mr. Simons from the Chemistry and Council.
Yes.
Yep. Sure. No, that's a good question, and I think that's an inaccurate statement. First of all, the CPSC granted a petition that was submitted by a group of NGOs, and they granted that petition to further evaluate the regulation of these flame retardants. They have not made a decision, and they are currently in the process, and this is before the National Academy of Sciences. So I think there may be some misleading information there.
Okay, but it was provided. It was provided by your colleague, and it says the commission has directed the CPSC staff to begin drafting a regulation under the Federal Hazardous Substances Act. that sounds like they are asking their staff to actually draft a regulation. I mean, that's what it says in what your colleague provided us.
Which one? Which?
So I'm sorry, the JPMA gave us a document.
Yeah.
And it's on the second to last page and the last page. And it says that they are drafting this regulation they directed their staff to. Are you saying that's mistaken?
Yes, and I'll let maybe others respond to that since they referenced that, but I think it's important to note that the CPSC has issued guidance. They've made it very clear that there is not a ban on those substances. They recently held a technical meeting to specifically discuss the issue of electronic casings. It was quite significant, and I think it reinforces some of the points that others have raised today in terms of the importance of fire safety for electronic components. So we're happy to share any and all of that information with the Assembly if it's helpful, and it may just be some confusion with regards to how the CPSC's decision to further evaluate the regulation of the chemicals underneath the Federal Hazardous Substance Act has been communicated. I think it's just some confusion there.
Excellent.
Go
ahead.
This is Andy Hackett on behalf of JPMA. It's our statement that's being referenced here. I'll just clarify that indeed the CPSC is evaluating these substances. We're not suggesting that there is a ban in place or that they are drafting a ban. We don't know what action they will take. But one thing I do want to underscore, if they take action under the FHSA and implement a requirement under the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act, that would have preemptive effect on the issues with which they regulate.
Right, absolutely. I guess my point in part to bring this up is you're arguing don't do this because we're duplicating, and your colleague is arguing they're not actually going to do this, so it's not duplicating. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, in terms of the duplication, it would be if CPSC moves forward with a restriction or a regulation of some sort to address risk, then there would be a duplication.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate that. I have other members in the queue, but we also need to get to Mr. Temple and Mr. Moyer. Just following up on Mr. Dunbar's question, though. So, Mr. Simon on the phone, Mr. Hackman said if we adopt the amendments, then that's their objection. They're neutral, I assume, but not an objection. Is that your position, Mr. Simon and Ms. Gibbons?
So this is Robert Simon. Two quick comments. So one, I think an earlier question had asked me about are any of these substances hazardous, and I just wanted to reinforce there are substances that have also been evaluated and determined to present a risk, and we support the regulation of those substances. So I did want to just reinforce that, and that does reinforce the question you just asked. Though is we would, while we think some of the proposed changes do address a lot of the concerns, we are still very much concerned about the overly broad definition of flame retardants for the reasons that I mentioned.
Gotcha. Clear. Appreciate it. And Ms. Gibbons?
If the amendments were adopted, and I'm assuming they're the amendments that I've seen, we would no longer oppose, but I wouldn't say that we would support it either, as we do feel very strongly that this type of regulation should be done at the federal level.
Good. A couple more, but you've been referencing the CPSC, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, is that right?
Yes, the CPSC is one of the, I also referenced the HFSA.
Which is?
The Federal Hazardous Substances Act.
Excellent. And I'm looking at the Federal Registry September 28th, 2017 notice of the Consumer Product Safety Commission. The commission announces, has approved a statement to protect consumers and children from the potential toxic effects of exposure to these chemicals. The commission recommends that manufacturers of children's products, upholstered furniture and mattress pads, and plastic casings surrounding the electronics refrain from intentionally adding non-polymeric organohalogen flame retardants, OFRs. And I think, and then number 2A in our bill is halogenated organophosphorus, organonitrogen, or nanoscaling flame retardant chemicals. So it includes OFRs, which are organohalogen flame retardants. So I guess for Mr. Simons, is that one of the ones that has been determined as dangerous, those OFRs?
So two things. OFRs is also, so as you appropriately mentioned, the ordinance covers a broad range of classes of chemicals. Within of those classes in the ordinance, there is the class of organohalogens, and that includes as many as 80 to 100 substances. Some of those have been reviewed and determined to be safe for their intended uses. So that's our concern, is that you're looping all of these things together. And despite what we've discussed here in terms of the CPSC, the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission, this ordinance would ban 3 or 4 additional classes beyond. So I know there's been some discussion about how the CPSC's action has been characterized, but setting that aside, the ordinance would ban 4 more classes of substances, if not more. So again, our concern about the overly broad definition there.
All right,
And I was just going to note as well, I know there's maybe some confusion about the CPSC, and we're happy to follow up with the Assembly, including the official guidance that's come from the CPSC. But I think it's worth noting that the CPSC technical staff, who did the original review of whether it was appropriate to group all these things together and regulated them, concluded that that was not appropriate and that should not go forward. And so I think this is an area of some debate that may be worth highlighting for as we consider policy in this area.
So is this bulletin of the in the Federal Registry been overturned, or that's still the commission position on OFRs?
So again, and this may be even better to have someone from the CPSC communicate this, but the decision stands to they've directed to further evaluate potential regulation of organohalogen flame retardants in those product categories that were mentioned. At the same time, though, they make it clear that they have not banned or restricted those substances, as they are moving forward with evaluating their potential regulation underneath the Federal Hazardous Substance Act. And that could result in a number of things. It could result in regulation of some of those chemicals in certain products. It could result in the regulation of some chemicals. So there's a broad process that now moves forward in terms of potentially regulating those materials. And we're supportive of that process and will contribute into the federal process for that.
Okay, so am I summarizing it right? They have recommended refraining from, but they have not banned yet.
That is correct. They've issued guidance and they're moving forward with evaluating formal regulation.
Sorry for how long that took. I had Mr. Trainee and Mr. Constant yet. Anyone I missed? Okay, Mr. Trainee.
Mr. Croft, Suzanne said we need to edit ourselves for the record. That was never done, so.
Why don't we do that now, then? That's
Dick
fine.
Trainee.
Forrest Dunbar.
Suzanne LaGrasse.
John Weddleton.
Felix Rivera. Christopher Constant.
Eric Croft.
Austin Quinn Davidson.
And one thing else.
Gretchen Wemhoff.
Mr. Trainee.
Fred Dyson is here too.
Dicey's here.
I'll recognize him when he comes back. Mr. Trainee.
One last thing. When you do the SE, I'm really interested in Department of Health's position on this, because if you're the one who's going to implement this, your staff's going to have to increase multiple times. Because what's to stop somebody, if you can't get the product you want on anchored shelves, get it on Amazon and order it. It's here in 2 days. So you guys are going to be policing the internet to see what's coming in. You don't have the manpower to do that.
We've got materials from the Department of Health, and they did attach their fiscal impacts. That's not generally, it's not a full C, but it's what they expect they might need to implement this.
We need a full C with both government and private impact.
Yeah.
That's all.
Mr. Constant.
Thank you. First, a simple matter. One thing I know, we're not having present local business people in the furniture business. And I think we should have another conversation with those folks because I have heard concerns from them. But on the other side of this question, I am hearing all these very professional people speaking to us about federal laws and how the federal government is who we should be looking to for protection. And I'm reminded of just yesterday a 5-minute speech by a congresswoman from New York who pointed out how clearly it is that federal laws are made and who they serve. So my question is, do we have the power to do this, or do we have to wait for Washington?
Yes, so.
To our council.
Okay, I'd like to finish public testimony from these people who've lined up. But you want to know from Mr. Gates whether we have the
Yeah,
authority?
this is this in our power, or should we be bowing to Washington?
Mr. Gates, do we have the authority to enact this ordinance?
I'm not put the preemption language from the Toxic Control Substances Act. You can wait for me to quote it up, I'll get out to you. From what I understood reading it in searching for this project, we have authority now, but when they do have something in them, something preemption language would apply. And I need to remind myself exactly what it says.
Let's not do it on the fly, but do give us to all the assembly members your opinion on preemption now and if they act. Mr. Weddle.
Following up on that a bit, to the people on the phone, how long will it take the Consumer Product Safety Commission to finish their work? It's been a year and a half. How much longer should we wait? Mr. Simon.
Yeah, thank you. I think all I can point to is that the process that was put in place, that the CPSC has directed the National Academy of Sciences to review whether they can, whether it's appropriate to group the class of organohalogens together. We understand that report will be completed or potentially released at the end of March. So that'll be some indicator. Now that's just the National Academy of Sciences review. I think the CPSC will then take that and consider how they might, underneath the Federal Hazardous Substances Act, regulate. It's difficult for me to speculate the time frame for that, but that would at least be the process.
The testifiers have been, telephonic particularly, have been doing great on short answers. My assembly, not so much, but Mr. Dunbar.
Mr. Simon, were the regulators that voted to ban these substances jeopardize future employment opportunities in your industry?
Maybe I didn't quite understand the question. I apologize.
Would regulators that voted to ban these substances jeopardize future employment opportunities in your industry that they are regulating?
If all of those substances were banned, it would definitely have an impact on our industry and have the impact on product safety. So yes, there would be an impact, but it also would depend on the nature of the regulation. As I mentioned, we support the regulation, strong regulation for chemicals, and there's specific substances that we strongly support, think that should be regulated. So it depends somewhat on the scope of the CPSC's regulation or that of other federal agencies, or for that matter, state agencies. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
If I could, I'd like to get Mr. Temple and Mr. Moyer here, Mr. Moyer here, and then we can go back to questions. So, Mr. Temple, are you still on the line?
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Assembly. This is Jeffrey Temple, I'm the Director of Corporate Affairs for Fred Meyer Stores, calling from Portland, Oregon. I appreciate the opportunity to provide some input on this proposed ordinance, and I'll just introduce that we are a retail business. If you live in and around the Anchorage area, you're probably familiar with our business and hopefully shop our stores. I'll just start by saying that Fred Meyer Coker supports efforts to protect consumers from unsafe products. That being said, our concern is that this proposed ordinance would require respective products, including upholstered furniture and juvenile products, to carry a label stating the materials in this product contain or do not contain added flame retardant chemicals. And simply applying a label, a special label for just Anchorage orders is not practical. In Anchorage, we have several stores, and there are only a few units for each upholstered furniture product in each store. If we were to ask our suppliers to apply a special label, they'll need to order less than 30 labels to accommodate that. No label factory will accept such a low volume label orders. So, even though suppliers get the customized label and with additional costs, our logistics infrastructure and process are not established to separate Anchorage orders from other stores. And as a result, we believe a passing of the proposed ordinance would result in a removal of the respective items from our assortment in our Anchorage stores. And this is something with which we believe our customers would not like. And so therefore, we strongly urge the removal of the labeling requirement. Thank you.
Mr. Weddleton here has a question.
Well, thanks. So regarding flame retardants on furniture, I'm curious why you would have furniture that has flame retardants. And we were told it doesn't burn really that much. And I don't believe it's really a selling point. Do you find that it's a selling point? You sell more of a piece of furniture because it says, hey, on flame retardant?
No, we don't find that to be the case.
Why are people paying to put this stuff on furniture when it doesn't seem to add value?
I couldn't say, to be honest.
Thank you, and then I think we'll have more questions. Ms. Wimmoff.
Following up on that, you mentioned, and I understand the concept of mass production of labels, but I also know that I get products where that's simply a Xerox sheet inside a packaging. Is that a possibility that a label can be modified by the manufacturer and or your store? I mean, kind of bypassing the need to go to a specific
that would be
labeling
very
group?
costly, and by extension would likely result in an increased retail for our customer, or more likely just a removal of the product.
So that's a new. It would not work to create them without going through the labeling manufacturers?
Well, again, with respect to your question, my understanding is that it would, though it may technically be possible, it would be costly to the outcome of raising the retails and or just the removal of the items from the assortment in the liquor stores.
Thank you.
Is labeling your primary objection, Mr. Temple, or do you object to other aspects of the bill?
The labeling is our primary concern and our main objection.
Okay, and then Mr. Moyer, welcome. Thank you for being here. And then we'll have anyone with questions for anybody, but just speak loudly so they can hear and so we can pick you up on the recording, maybe even step up a little more. Identify your association.
Mr. Chair, thank you, and members of the Assembly. I'm Dan Moyer, I'm the Senior Manager of Environmental Policy with the Consumer Technology Association. We represent the North American tech industry. Basically, anyone who makes an electronic device you're familiar with, and 80% of our members are small businesses. I believe you have a letter from us and ITI, which is a trade association representing IT manufacturers. So I won't go, we're short on time, so I won't go and repeat anything about the internal components you've heard about. But I also wanted to touch on the definition of juvenile products as any product that can be designed for use by someone under 12. So that could include gaming consoles, televisions, phones, and tablets. All of these devices have flame retardants within them because there's no internal current. And so in order to prevent any potential fire hazard, flame retardants are included in the as you know, of ours. Also, in order to sell in the United States with most retailers, you have laptop and tablet manufacturers have to meet UL 94, which is a fire safety standard. In order to meet that, you usually have to use a flame retardant in order to sell the laptop. So we're asking, we support the red line that was submitted by industry. We're asking that electronics and electronic components be carved out. One last thing I want to touch on is for furniture, we represent manufacturers. I think Panasonic submitted a letter with massage chairs, gaming chairs, any, you plug your phone into a charger inside a chair, home theater seating. All of these also have flame retardants in the internal components. Generally, they're not accessible, so we ask that those be exempted as well. And then I'm happy to take it.
Mr. Dunbar's question, you may have more, but if we adopt the amendment you've suggested, particularly on the electronics, what's your position on the bill after that?
We wouldn't be opposed.
Okay. Mr. Dunbar.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Maybe we're talking about a different document, or maybe there's additional red lines. But the one version I had is electronic components of upholstered furniture, but it seems to indicate a broader category of electronics, and you're worried that this ordinance would affect.
Yeah, the version that I had seen, I can submit an additional version. It's electronic products and electronic components.
Okay, that makes sense.
Just to keep it broader, so
and
the laptops.
I think the CSC proposed regulation or potential regulation we saw made a distinction between sort of internal flame retardants and external flame retardant coatings. The electronics you're talking about, like laptops, for example, are they also coated in flame retardant?
Depends on the product. Some products, if there's a plastic casing, will have flame retardant in it. So if you have a television, there's a heat source that goes into the back. In order to prevent it from catching fire, you have a flame retardant in the back casing. Something that has a
in the casing, but also outside on the casing?
It's within the plastic.
Go ahead and shout for us but yeah, just speak a little louder.
So I guess, I mean, if we were to prohibit, we were to make an exemption for electronic products and anything sort of internal to electronic products, but maintain a ban on something that was like a coating, would that be?
We'd have a problem with that as well. Right now, most manufacturers, I'll start off by saying every electronic product is different. There's thousands of different products, but for things like televisions, that most manufacturers do include flame retardants in the external casings as well as the internal components.
So I know, good catch on that. So the one that isn't in red, the one that's middle of your packet, does say electronic products and electronic components on a poster. I'm not sure why the one that is in red doesn't have that provision, but I'll ask Mr. Bickford to get us the latest and greatest.
I have copies of the
Good.
editions.
And so to the extent there are any other, but that one in the middle does have electronic products. And who else was interested in questions? I'm sorry, did you have more?
No.
Assembly members, Ms. Wimhoff.
Yes, just clarifying, I'm reading D, the prohibitions contained in this section shall not apply to the following electronic components of upholstered furniture, reupholstered furniture, juvenile products, or any associated casing for those electronic components. And what I'm hearing you say is that is stuff that's on the inside, dealing with things that people can't touch normally. And do you feel that's the clear enough reading of that?
We're also asking that electronic products and the internal components be exempted.
Okay, so an electronic baby monitor?
Exactly. And, for under the age of 12, sometimes you have 11-year-olds using gaming consoles or like leapfrog products for educational materials or tablets or things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Further questions for any of our presenters? We do have the Department of Health representative here as well as our fire chief, but a primary purpose of this was to have any questions answered from these testifiers. You're all four welcome. Oh, sorry, Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, sorry I had to step out for a few minutes. But your intention is to come up with a substitute?
Yeah,
with these amendments and what we've learned today?
That would be my intention, yeah.
And we won't have another public hearing except on the floor?
That's open for discussion from the sponsors and the members. Mr. Dunbar.
So on that, we actually haven't had a public hearing on this yet. We've had a series of work sessions. It's just now going to public hearing. I think my intention, and obviously the chair has more control over this, is we're introducing it. I'd like to do public hearing or some public hearing, and then probably continue public hearing and either have amendments or a substitute version and do at least another work session between now and then. And the reason is really to get to what Mr. Concept says, which is I'd like to hear from some more local merchants, particularly once we make those changes. Or, I guess we'd have to close public hearing in order to amend it. So I think a substitute might be more appropriate. An S version might be more appropriate.
Yeah, Mr. Concept.
I concur on that, and I think that we need to hear from the local merchants, also see the next iteration of this, and then hear from the fire department again on the iteration that is approved, because all of this, we got so much in front of us now that the target's in motion, and it's certainly not square enough for us to get to. And we can introduce and move forward just as long as everyone's clear that we may end up delaying a bit until we get to the point where we all understand what we're talking about.
Okay, let's use this for the valuable people we have here. So we have the health department next, but we can decide our own procedures. Mr. Dyson.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad we're going to have this process. And I was talking just briefly to the fire chief, and not speaking for her, but apparently a significant hazard and downstream effect for firefighters. And like we saw with Agent Orange, and some of the effects are cumulative and long period of time. My guess is we don't know a lot, and I suspect the dangers are also highly exacerbated in confined spaces, as opposed to fighting fire outdoors or whatever. And also, I have limited experience fighting fires mostly in the petroleum industry and in ships. But part of what the argument for these things is it slows down the fire spread and so on. And there's some balance there in risk of slowing it down. Fighting fires, time is profoundly and exponentially important. Getting there with a little bit in 2 minutes is better than 10 trucks in 20 minutes. So there's a part of the discussion that if we have time, I'd like to hear more about. And yeah, thank you. And my sense is today's not the day.
I've been trying to get there, Mr. Trainee.
I want to ask him a question, sir.
Well, I'd like them to present first, and then you ask them a question. So just, if you'd give us, from the health department, identify yourself, and did you want to say something, or just be open for questions?
Sure, I'm Deanne Bedco. I'm the Deputy Director at the Anchorage Health Department, and I'm here with my colleague Matt Stitchick from our environmental health team. We have provided a number of comments on the proposed ordinance, and those are in front of you. We can certainly speak to them or answer questions, however you'd like to proceed. And then we've also provided what we believe to be an economic impact, at least an initial one, based on conversations that we've had with San Francisco. We're happy to answer any questions on that as well.
I guess questions. Sure, Mr. Trainer.
Ma'am, have you figured out the economic impact on private industry?
No, we have not.
Okay. How about the economic impact on your department? Because it's going to increase your workload tremendously. Have you figured out what the cost is going to be?
Yes, we provided an initial economic investment spreadsheet, and this would cover everything from, this is what it looks like, would cover everything from educating the industry as well as enforcement of the ordinance if the health department is tasked with doing so, and the resources in terms of staff and equipment that would go along with that.
So the total is about $175,000 in 2019.
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It's in your packet, Mr.
I know, I just couldn't find it. Thank you. Getting old.
Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, and as I've worked on some related issues before, I was trying to get insurance companies particularly to be more discriminatory. People with very good records, good tires, brakes, get a break on automobile insurance. And the answer I got from the majors was, Alaska is such a small market, our company isn't going to, the national company isn't going to do anything just to tailor to Alaska. And I suspect it's got to be true, whatever the market is for in Alaska for this range of products here, unless there's a significant national demand, the providers may not comply because we're out on the margins of their market. The net result is those products disappear from here and so on. And we've seen that in several other areas. And boy, if it's possible to get some credible information about that, I'd really like to know. And maybe Mr. Bickford could help us. Emphasis on the credible.
Do you want to respond?
Yeah, just quickly.
No, I wanted to know if anyone wanted to respond.
I'm Matt Stitchick with the Anchorage Health Department, and we agree that there is additional stakeholder interaction that really ought to occur to discuss the impacts of proposed legislation. Certainly, I do anticipate that there would be a significant ramp-up time needed to implement such an ordinance, and that it may change what's available on the
Thank you for that response. Mr. Constant.
So then the difference between what we're proposing and what happened in California, is it simply the labeling? Who would know that answer? Because, if California does it, there's a market for it.
Sure.
And we will have the benefit of that, right? And so I would like to know the difference between what they've done, because the seventh largest economy in the world, we're going to be able to continue to have couches and such.
The California legislation required special labeling as proposed. This would not.
So the California marketplace does have labeling.
Yes.
So then, effectively, if it's made for California, we could have it shipped up here.
Correct.
Under this
If
rubric.
that were something that the retailers wanted to do, they could supply the same components. That's what California to allow.
So, one quick follow-up.
Yeah.
Is the gentleman from Fred Meyer on the phone? Still?
Mr. Temple?
Mute button.
Okay, so I guess the question I would ask him if you were on the phone is, does Kroger distribute to California? Right, because their distribution system would effectively capture Alaska. And so, thank you.
Yeah, I know there are a number of Anchorage retailers who have already taken the step of not having any furniture that has these products on it. And then there may be a mix of some that do. But there are national and local that have committed to not doing this. It's an evolving marketplace on that. We have Chief Hetrick here. We've heard from you before, but what's the fire department's position on this? And can I borrow Dr. Levy for just a little bit? Dr. Levy is the medical doctor for the department. I've worked with him on a couple of different issues. He's fabulous, and so I want him to look at some of the medical evidence on it.
So the fire department is still in support that we ban this class of flame retardant chemicals. We would like to reduce the exposure of the off-gassing of these chemicals as they break down from the fabrics to our community, because it puts our community worse under protected risk. We would also like to see them gone because it increases the exposure and potentiality of cancer for our workforce. It's my job as the fire chief to make sure that our people can work in as safe as environment as possible. And obviously we can't make it completely risk-free. However, any opportunity we have to eliminate a risk, and starting today means the people, the 22 people we just hired for the academy, maybe they could have, be successful throughout their career, never have cancer and retire, happy and healthy. That work has to happen today. We have to do this work now, so in the future we're not having this exact same argument. So we are in supportive. I agree with the arguments of taking this out of maybe eliminating the car seat components and some of those others. I think we'd be in agreement with that. But for this class of chemicals, their ability to actually be flame retardant and slow flame spread, I think with that question out there, we have other mechanisms to work harder at preventing fires from happening to begin with. That should be our focus instead of using questionable chemicals that put our people at risk.
Mr. Constant.
Thanks. Earlier we had someone say, Chief, that firefighting inside is toxic, but maybe not so much outside. But don't we have examples of individuals who have become very sick and maybe died because of their exposure outside?
So inside or outside doesn't really matter. The issue is what's burning. Yeah. And if you have a natural product, if you have a tree burning, we all sit around the campfire and we're okay with that. But if you throw trash or your plastics or anything else in that campfire, now you're exposed to dangerous chemicals that are off-gassed by the combustion process. So it isn't an outside versus an inside issue. It is what product is burning. And now our concerns are as more chemicals are used in agriculture and as weed killers and pesticides and things like that, are now used in the natural environment more. As those chemicals burn, now we're being exposed and we don't even think of that. That isn't part of the concern. So it isn't so much the location of where the fire is and the confinement of the fire. It is much more about what products are being burned.
I hear about Firehouse 12, people burning furniture and wire, and that's what's causing a lot of
Yes. Yep. And that was our case in Alaska, was with Andy Mullen.
Representative Mr. Mullen. Mr. Rivera, did you have a question? Do we still have any of the testifiers on telephone?
Jennifer Gibbons is here.
Okay. Thank you for your patience. Do you have a question for who? Mr. Rivera?
I don't know if Ms. Gibbons is with JPMA or with one of the other associations, but perhaps Ms. Gibbons, you could answer this question. We were talking about labeling, and the letter by JPMA, when they talk about labeling, they state that the California provision that had labeling requirements was repealed. And then they also state that in 2015, when California attempted to add labeling requirements, that the legislation was rejected. And so I just want to get clarification on whether California actually does have labeling requirements or not. It's confusing in what we're hearing and what we're reading.
I'm with the Toy Association of the Juvenile Manufacturers Association, so if Andy Hackman is on, he would be the one to follow up on that since that's his letter. Andy, are you on?
Yeah, that was wise not to answer someone else's letter question, so good on you. We will get that answer. 1975, Technical Bulletin 117 was passed by California. It was revised in 13, effective 1/1/14. It made a major change in in the labeling requirement. We'll get you the details of that. It was a huge fight to get to that place. A lot of ink on it. Any other comments, I guess, from any other member of the public about, or person in the audience? We hit most of them. Any assembly member questions? We're just after 1 or 2 rather, so I knew this would be packed. Thank you. We'll take about 5 minutes and we'll gavel into the next chair. We're adjourned.